Good morning, and thank you for watching this special report from Natick, Massachusetts regarding a simple neighbor's dispute, which quickly escalated and turned into a criminal case against Mr. Trabelsi. Mr. Trabelsi, along with two more families from Israel, formed a local corporation called Magnolia Road LLC in order to build 3 homes and make their residency in Natick, Massachusetts. As Mr. Trabelsi began clearing the property for the new homes, the two neighbors, Mr. Tabet and Mr. Shaughnessy, saw an opportunity to also fix their backyard at the same time, and they requested from Mr. Trabelsi to authorize the contractor to do so. First was the neighbor, Mr. Tabet, requesting to build 400 feet of custom fence to block the noise and the view from Route 90 Turnpike Highway, which Mr. Trabelsi agreed to build with a minimum cost to keep the neighbors happy. In addition, Mr. Tabet requested to cut down a large tree which was dangerously leaning against his home. Again, Mr. Trabelsi agreed to remove the tree. Unfortunately, Mr. Tabet, as of today, continues to deny requesting from Mr. Trabelsi to cut the large tree or building the long fence. We have obtained the original video copy from Mr. Tabet publicly admitting that indeed he was the one who requested the work. Please listen.
I've had a few emails with him, and when he said something about the trees, I remember telling him, your guys are working, one of the trees is dangerously leaning towards my house, and he said, I'll cut it. I said, thank you. That's the only exchange.
Despite confessing on live video, Mr. Tabet continues to pose against Mr. Trabelsi, only to avoid paying the invoice due, sparing no efforts, including false acquisition at the police and building department. The second neighbor, Mr. Shaughnessy, also wanted to take advantage of the contractor and requested to remove some earth on the property line, which was blocking the water from flowing from his property, creating a puddle of water on his property every time it rains. Mr. Trabelsi agreed to fix and correct this with a minimum cost, just to keep the neighbors happy. In addition, Mr. Shaughnessy requested to cut a couple large trees which were dangerously leaning against his home and swimming pool. Again, Mr. Trabelsi agreed and authorized the contractor to perform the work. Also, Mr. Shaughnessy, as of today, continues to deny the fact of request from Mr. Trabelsi to cut down the large trees or to fix the dirt bump between the properties. We also obtained the original video copy in which Mr. Shaughnessy publicly admitting that he indeed was the one to request the work. Please.
And what I said was, the big oaks and the big maples that wreaked havoc on my yard and my pool, I would have loved to have seen them go. Just those trees. And I did have a conversation about that.
But unfortunately, he continues to pose against Mr. Trabelsi, actually joining forces with Mr. Tabet and together starting a witch hunt against building the new homes, practically having the police and the building department visiting the building site almost on a daily basis. On March 9, 2016, Mr. Trabelsi received a demolition permit from the planning board, having no objection to remove the existing old home from the property. Mr. Trabelsi's idea was to please the neighbors and the building department, because the old house was in very bad condition, taking a toll on the surrounding home's value, especially when kids snuck in for smoking. Mr. Trabelsi legally received a demolition permit and successfully completed the removal of the existing rundown home according to the local building codes. Mr. Trabelsi later learned it was a very bad decision, now stuck with an unbuildable lot, but a beautiful open lot with view overlooking the lake of Cochituate, which now promoted the two neighbors to pose to the new buildings even harder. We have visited the property on Magnolia Road, Natick, Massachusetts, and found that Mr. Trabelsi indeed left the property clean from any debris and furthermore planted over 200 new trees on the property's lines, providing privacy with a beautiful view overlooking the lake of Cochituate. Apparently, the neighbors are still not happy and continuing to harass Mr. Trabelsi, now resulting in the Natick Planning Board's action to cancel the approval and permit to rebuild the new home. The result was the Planning Board's new decision to cancel the building permits. It immediately prompted the bank to follow suit as the value of the property drastically dropped, sending the property to bank foreclosure. A total of $1 million were lost. Frustrated, Mr. Trabelsi then served the two neighbors with a demand letter to stop harassing. Otherwise, he will be forced to file a lawsuit against the two neighbors. The warning did not help much. Mr. Trabelsi received a police notice for a court hearing as Mr. Tabet and Mr. Shaughnessy filed criminal complaints against Mr. Trabelsi of fraudulent documents and witness intimidation, when in fact the documents were real, and regarding witness intimidation, Count Mr. Trabelsi and neighbors did not have any ongoing legal litigation previously between them, but the police filed the complaining without even questioning Mr. Trabelsi. Over a year with ongoing court appearances without the neighbors, Mr. Tabet and Mr. Shaughnessy showing up, finally Mr. Trabelsi decided to plead guilty on the witness intimidation count, but the fraudulent claims were removed by the Judge Fabry. During the plea guilty hearing before Judge Fabry, Mr. Trabelsi explained to the judge that there is ongoing legal litigation between Mr. Trabelsi and the neighbors Mr. Tabet and Mr. Shaughnessy, and the judge changed from 25 feet no contact to only 10 feet as the two parties may meet at the court. Mr. Trabelsi was happy to conclude this matter with the police and finally began a personal bankruptcy as a result of the losses experienced trying to start fresh. Amazingly, the two neighbors showed up at the bankruptcy trustee meeting a couple of times to continue the same behavior, bad-mouthing and harassing Mr. Trabelsi. Mr. Trabelsi was shocked to receive yet another court hearing regarding Mr. Tabet and Mr. Shaughnessy, now accusing Mr. Trabelsi that he threatened to sue them through the bankruptcy trustee. Fortunately to Mr. Trabelsi, we obtained a copy of the audio sound at the bankruptcy trustee meeting. The audio shows clearly that Mr. Trabelsi in fact refused to speak directly to the neighbors Mr. Tabet and Mr. Shaughnessy, and as a matter of fact explaining to the trustee, Mr. Grossman, that there is a court order not to be in contact with those two neighbors. Therefore, I will talk to the trustee directly. Mr. Trabelsi refused to talk to the two neighbors directly at the bankruptcy trustee meeting, and instead faced the trustee talking to him directly. Here, listen for yourself.
The new is case number 17-14630. Nisam Trabelsi. My name is Stuart Gray. After 7 trustee, we're here for your first meeting of the division. I'd like to first swear you in. Promise to hold the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth. The record.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Tabet. We are the neighbors of the property where Mr. Trabelsi has been doing work.
In Natick?
In Natick, 24 Magnolia Road. This is
and
my wife, Adrian.
Are you a creditor or
Yes.
are you a potential creditor? Do you have a judgment against him?
One of them, yeah.
Okay.
Dave Shaughnessy, 7 Bayberry Road, Natick. I have a judgment against him as well.
Okay. Don't have any questions about what I've asked him so far? Sure.
Magnolia Road LLC was dissolved. Was that after the foreclosure?
I don't know who's this guy. I'm not going to talk.
He's a creditor.
I don't care. I'm not going to talk to him. If you have any questions,
Well, that's not the way the system works.
well, I have a
Let him
court
ask the
order telling me not to
question.
talk to him.
You have a court order?
Not to come 10 feet. He's too close to me right now. Those two guys, they need to be 10
There's
feet
a
away.
restraint, a 10-foot restraint.
There's a restraining order?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
You
but-
all have restraining orders?
Me, no.
No, Saeed and I
Just
do.
us, the three of us.
It's,
Have you ever had him?
I don't believe that's the proper term. I don't think it's a
It's not
restraining order.
restraining.
It's a do not approach.
Do not approach.
I don't know what that means. But so your question is, was the
When
entity
was the
dissolved?
LLC dissolved after the
Well, we
foreclosure?
could figure that out by just calling the secretary.
Those people destroyed me before the city committee. The land that I bought, it's worth
Is
shit.
this Magnolia?
Magnolia, of nothing, shit, junk. So I could not sell it. It cannot be sold. It cannot be sold, and you cannot build on it. Nobody wanted it. The bank told me you're not going to make money. You're not going to make payment. I have a foreclosure. The foreclosure on me. Somebody has owned it now, and those guys chasing me here until not to here. They're crazy. They destroy me over there. They're still chasing me into the bankruptcy.
But they have a judgment against you.
They got a judgment because I was not in the state
Well,
of
that's why you're in
mind.
bankruptcy.
Right. I mean, I have stand in mind to fight because I had some issues with my health, and I didn't have an attorney to present me, so it was a big jungle for mess. But now I have my family backing me up from Israel. We're raising a lot of money. We're hiring a big attorney from here in Boston. We're going after each one individually here. Those guys, they're gonna pay for what they did to
I
me
think you need an
in the court.
attorney.
I need an attorney, right? So right now,
Because you don't have that cause of action. That's your bankrupt estate's cause of action.
I don't understand what you're saying.
You don't have the right to sue them for something they did before the bankruptcy. Only I do.
No, only you do.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
The new evidence puts the two neighbors, Mr. Tabet and Mr. Shaughnessy, in the category of deliberately and fraudulently lying under oath several times now. We spoke to Mr. Trabelsi and received a statement quote, "The two neighbors, Mr. Tabet and Mr. Shaughnessy, just to pay balance due invoice for a work I perform for them. Start this harassing companion sparing no effort to killed the project posing on me and my family very hard time. I still have 4 children attending school, which feels every bit of the action. And one can go and visit the property and see for themselves that I never crossed the property line. See certified engineered flags on the property lines, it's very clear. Signed Nissim Trabelsi, May 14, 2018. Mr. Trabelsi asking the Honorable Judge Fabry to please dismiss. the police department claims filed by two neighbors, Mr. Tabet and Mr. Shaughnessy, as clearly this is the local dispute, only between neighbors, and not a criminal case. Respectfully submitted, Nasim Trabelsi.